Right. Welcome back, everyone. And then, time for Thomas of Redhill joins the Redhill Army, Part 2. I should warn you, this is going to get frightening and also a little bit gory, so if you're with younger kids, best not let them watch this. Okay? But they can watch it if they like. Long story. Right, I'll let you decide. Sit back, relax, turn off your phones. Well, unless you're watching this on your phone. Alright, just scratch that last bit. Anyway. It's about to begin. Thomas of Redhill joins the Redhill Army, Part 2. A few days later, Thomas was about to head out on his first mission with a large platoon of Redhill soldiers. Idris wasn't able to come with him, as he, along with Christopher and Ulfric, were on business for the general. Thomas stood in the middle of the platoon as the general gave his speech. "You're all some of the best troops a general could ask for. That is why I'm sending you on this mission to the Valley of the Fallen Lords. There have been reports of a large group of werewolf mercenaries gathering there, and attacking anyone who passes through there. Your mission is to hunt them down and slaughter them and try and capture their leader, so we can find out what Wolfskin's plans are. Now, move out! For Redhill!" The general bellowed and raised his greatsword, making all the soldiers of the platoon raise their weapons and yell, "For Redhill!" over and over again. Then Thomas looked up at the soldier to his right. He was big and muscular, with long black hair, blue eyes, a deep slash on his right cheek, and wearing both steel armour and chainmail, along with a steel longsword sheathed at his belt and a spear in his hand. He seemed to sense that Thomas was looking at him, so he turned to look at Thomas and smiled kindly. "How do you do, kid? My name's Danny. What's your name?" he asked as Thomas looked up at him. Thomas held out a hand and Danny shook it. "My name is Thomas of Redhill," he said as he stood shakingly. Danny smiled kindly at Thomas and patted him on the shoulder. "Idris's little brother. So, this is your first battle?" he asked. Thomas nodded. "Don't worry, kid. I'll look out for you," Danny finished reassuringly as the platoon began to march out to battle. Thomas and Danny began to walk as well as the platoon burst into battle song and marched north. "So, Danny, what does our platoon do? Will we be serving beverages, to make treaties, or just..." Thomas stopped as Danny chuckled kindly and looked at him. "Oh no, laddie. Our platoon is the best job. We're the first ones into battle," Danny said. Thomas's blood turned to ice. They were the first ones to fight. They hadn't told him this. He was going into battle. Thomas felt his fear rise in his chest and jumped as Danny clasped a scarred hand on Thomas's shoulder. He looked up to see Danny smiling at him reassuringly. "As I said, kid, just stick with me and I'll look out for you," Danny said to the young half-elf. Thomas nodded, and then he continued to march to where the Werewolf Mercenaries were said to be. Then the platoon neared the valley where the werewolves were said to be. Then they began to run into the valley, and Thomas felt his fear begin to rise. They all reached the valley, but the werewolves were nowhere to be seen. The soldiers started mumbling, and Thomas looked around, and shaking all over. "Don't be scared, kid. I'll look out for you," Danny whispered. Then they heard a yell and saw that the werewolves had attacked the 3 soldiers. "Attack!" the captain yelled, and they charged into battle against the werewolves. The werewolf soldiers and the werewolf mercenaries charged into battle with each other. Thomas drew his short swords and charged into battle with Danny. He slashed at a werewolf's throat, and it fell to the ground dead. Then Thomas was knocked to the ground as a werewolf stood over him. Thomas yelled in fear as the werewolf prepared to attack, but then it screeched in pain as Danny ran his spear through its body and out the other side. He held out a hand to help Thomas up. You saved my life, Danny. Thanks," Thomas stammered as he got to his feet. Danny smiled and drew his longsword from his belt. "Oh, don't get all soft, Tommy. We've got werewolves to kill," he bellowed, and charged off into battle. Thomas then ran forward and fought in the battle as the army of Redhill fought the werewolves of Daniel Wolfskin. Then a hail of stones flew out of nowhere, and one hit him right in the forehead. He collapsed to the ground and was knocked out as the Redhill soldiers and werewolf mercenaries fought each other. Ooh, it's getting scary now. As the sun broke over the mountains in the east, Thomas woke up. He rubbed his head as he sat up. Blood poured from his forehead from where the stone had hit him, and he looked around at the battlefield. The sun was blood red, which meant blood had been spilled that night in the battle. The Redhill army platoon and the werewolf mercenaries were all dead. He got to his feet, picked up his short swords, and walked across the battlefield. All were dead, and then he heard someone call for him. Tommy, over here," said the voice. Thomas turned to see Danny lying on the ground. He dashed over to him and knelt beside him. "Danny," Thomas stammered. He looked down at his friend. The lower half of his body was gone, so that his legs and lower torso were missing, and he was bleeding heavily. "Give it to me straight, kid." "How hurt am I?" Danny struggled to say through his wounds. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood. Thomas tried to find the right words. "Oh, you look fantastic. You've got some swell colour in your face." Thomas broke off as Danny looked into his eyes. "I can see it in your eyes. I'm a goner." Before Thomas could say anything, Danny spoke again. "Help me up, Tommy. I can't feel my legs," Danny stammered as Thomas lifted him up into his arms. "Oh, come on now, Danny, hang on. Just keep taking deep breaths, and I'm gonna go and find your legs. They must be around here somewhere." Thomas trailed off as he looked around at the battlefield. Then he heard Danny struggle to breathe and looked down at him. "No, Danny, please, hang in there. Danny, please, hold on. We've just got to know each other. Please, don't go," Thomas said as tears formed in his emerald green eyes. Danny lifted his arm up and grasped at Thomas's shoulder. The colour was now draining from his face. "Don't make my mistake, Tommy. Don't keep following military rules all of your life. Think for yourself and trust in yourself," Danny said with his last breath. Then he sighed and closed his eyes. Thomas watched on as he held Danny in his arms and mourned his friend's death. It was such a sad moment. Poor Thomas. Poor old Thomas. He doesn't have a very good luck now, does he? But I hope that you've not got too emotional, and I should have told you to bring your tissues as well. Now, I'll let you all have a break. To be continued. See you in a bit.